The Eastern Front of World War II saw many great battles, and this video is about none of them. Instead, it is about combat in Estonia, a small country in the northeast of Europe. But Estonia did not participate in the Second World War as a country, because at its start it was occupied and annexed by the Soviet Union. Then Germany invaded the Soviet Union and Estonia fell under German occupation. The Germans then advanced deep into the Soviet Union, but soon the Soviets went on a counter-offensive and began taking back their territory. In January of 1944, another stage of the Red Army's offensive was about to begin. As part of it, the Soviets made it their goal to reach the territory of Estonia. The Soviets broke through the German front line defenses and the Germans started falling back to their second defensive line, the Panther line. In the north, the line was located on the Narva river, which was on the territory of Estonia. After reaching the line, the Red Army decided to outflank the strong German defenses around the city of Narva from the south. They made some progress, but the Germans had established their defense in depth and had constructed a strong point called Sinimäed, or the Blue Hills, behind their lines, which the Soviets were unable to take. The Soviets remained committed to their plan of outflanking the Germans, while the Germans wanted to hold on to Narva at all costs. Both the Soviets and the Germans sent strong reinforcements to this area. The Soviets needed to divert the Germans from their main attack, and they launched 3 diversionary attacks. The attacks around Narva were not successful, and the third attack was only partially a success. As a result, the German defenses remained strong, and the main Soviet attack towards the sea was repelled. The Soviets realized they could not achieve success and began pulling their forces back from this sector. The Germans used this to push them back somewhat, but they lacked the strength to push the Soviets over the Narva river. Then the spring thaw turned the terrain into mud and put an end to the winter campaign of 1944. During the spring of 1944, the Soviets were preparing for the summer campaign, and they set the goals for their next offensive. They wanted to destroy the German Army Group Center and the Army Group North. On June the 22nd, the Soviets launched the first phase of the plan. They encircled a large part of the Army Group Center in the Operation Bagration. With half of the Army Group destroyed, the Soviets then advanced towards the sea and cut off the path of retreat for Army Group North. The next part of the plan was to push Army Group North into the sea and destroy it. As part of this, the Soviets began another offensive near Narva. When the Red Army began its attack, the Germans did not have the forces to defend all of the front line, and they gave up Narva and pulled back to a new defensive line near Sinimäed, which they called the Tannenberg line. The Red Army had successfully taken Narva, but now it had to advance through terrain further west. It did not want to advance through the swampy woodland in the south and decided to advance via a thin strip of land between the woods and the sea. But the Germans had deployed most of their artillery to this area. The Red Army greatly struggled to advance through the heavy German fire. After 2 weeks of combat, the Soviets were only able to push the German defenses back less than a kilometer. This engagement became known as the Battle of the Tannenberg Line and cost the Germans 10,000 and the Soviets 35,000 soldiers dead and wounded. It is considered to be the largest single engagement ever fought on Estonian territory. After suffering these setbacks, the Soviet assault forces were withdrawn. They were dispatched further south, where the Soviets planned another breakthrough. The Soviets had been on the offensive for more than a month and now could make only minor gains. In the north, their advance had made it to the territory of Estonia. In the first half of August, the Soviets broke through the German front. Their forward units raced west to capture the railway junction of Valga. But the Germans were able to reinforce their positions, and after a battle, they stopped the Soviet advance. The Germans now began setting up a new defensive line in the west, but this diverted their attention from the Soviet advance to the north. The Soviets were able to outmaneuver the German forces and take a major town of Tartu. They continued to advance north of the river Emajõgi, but were pushed back by a German counterattack. By that time, the Soviets were completely exhausted after a months-long offensive, and they had to regroup for several weeks. This had given the Germans the time to re-establish a land connection with their forces, and they were now preparing to pull the whole army group out of the encirclement. As the Soviets restarted their offensive, the Germans began their withdrawal. The Soviets attempted to cut off the retreating German forces. They were most successful near Tartu, where they dispersed the German division and broke through. They then headed north to trap the German forces retreating from the Narva front and were able to cut off and destroy a German division. The Soviets turned west to capture the ports, but the Germans managed to ship away their forces. In this power vacuum, Estonians attempted to declare independence of Estonia to be restored, but they lacked military strength and were ignored. The Red Army took over most of the Estonian mainland. The Germans set out to also abandon the Estonian islands. The Red Army occupied the islands of Muhu and Hiiumaa without encountering much resistance and then landed on Saaremaa. The Germans abandoned most of Saaremaa and took favorable defensive positions on the thick neck of the Sõrve Peninsula. The Soviets attempted to outflank the German defenses by amphibious assaults, but these were defeated. The Germans decided to hold the peninsula for as long as possible and in order to do that, established several defensive lines. The Soviets brought up more troops and launched a proper assault. They were able to cover significant ground, but eventually the assault was stopped by the heavy artillery fire from the German cruisers. The Soviets prepared even more thoroughly for the second assault. Their attack quickly broke into the wide part of the peninsula. The Germans could not hold the Soviets back anymore, and under the cover of the heavy naval artillery, they were able to load their troops on the ships and leave Saaremaa. With that, most of the Estonian territory was under the Red Army's control. The last part to be captured was the island of Ruhnu, where the Red Army landed unopposed by the Germans in December of 1944. The Army Group North was able to escape the Red Army's encirclement, but it was not able to escape the second encirclement further south and remained cut off in Kurland. The Red Army attempted again to defeat the Germans by pushing them into the sea, but the Germans' much shortened front allowed them to hold out in Kurland until the German surrender in May of 1945.